Hey everyone, here we are. Final Cut Pro Saturday Meetup. Up in my upper left is Tony Gallardo. My upper right is Brad Olson with the blurry background and blurry microphone. My lower right is Bill Davis, not the one that works for Apple.
Sharp as a tack, I bet.
Well, you are, yes. I know that for a fact.
No, I'm talking about my picture.
Yeah, your picture is sharp, and I think my picture is sharp as well. I'm Richard Taylor. We are here. We're going to talk about, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about. We just wanted to get together today because we were bored.
You guys may be bored. I'm roped. That's the problem of going to NAB. You come back and all the work you haven't done on the most of the week you've been there is waiting for you to get to it.
Yeah, I noticed that. Now, one thing I did notice about NAB over the last couple of years is the further you get from NAB, the more you forget about how far things are apart. Because I'm telling you, this time I knew they were far apart, and we've talked about it, but when I got there, it's like, man, it's like the more I walk, the further it gets.
I tried over and over again to say the scale of the town is odd. You know, it's just right there. I can see it.
Right.
I can see it clear as a bell. I should be able to walk there. And 35 minutes later, you're going, I still should be able to walk there. I appear to be about halfway.
Where am I?
Exactly. So, one of the things that I really liked about NAB this year is, in lieu of the fact that Faster Together didn't have a 3-day event like they did in 2018, was Frame.io. That seemed to be a pretty central place for people to be hanging out for. As far as Final Cut Pro, what do you guys think? As far as a Final Cut Pro centric place?
Yeah, it was kind of our only safe haven on the show floor for us to know that we would see some familiar faces. Although Tony was next door part of the time, at least.
I would have to sneak over at certain times to go over there and hang out.
Did you
Peeps.
Did you take your black magic shirt off before you came over?
I didn't. Oh. I left it on. I just walked around like this everywhere.
You know what Tony is? Gaffer's tape. Just a piece of gaffer's tape.
I should have had the white piece of or pink one, right? Put it on top of everything.
Well, when I would
be fair,
really
Resolve
step up.
Yeah, I was gonna say Resolve they were showing off Resolve integration with Frame.io. Or Frame.io integration into Resolve at the Frame.io booth. So there was definitely a home for somebody with a black magic shirt over at the Frame.io booth.
Oh, absolutely.
I talked to one of the Frame.io guys just there, chatting, and he was like, "So you use Resolve?" I'm like, "Well, I use Final Cut." And he kept looking at me, he was like cross-eyed. I'm like, "I use Resolve and I use Final Cut. I love them both equally." So
equally.
Well, I mean, because Resolve is like, it's also not just an editor thing. It's a multi-tool. I use it for transcoding, obviously color. So it's got
What maybe the story of this NAB, though, for me at least, is that these workflow solutions in families are getting more and more robust. They're growing outward. Companies like Frame.io play in multiple camps and are happy to do so. So it was interesting to me how much of a larger presence. I mean, every year since Frame.io came on my radar, what was it, 4 years ago?
2015.
5 years ago?
No, you were right. 4 years ago.
4 years ago, they have significantly increased not only their footprint at NAB, but apparently their footprint in the industry really fast. So they're on a growth spurt. I know they did an IPO, or not. I don't think it was a public offering.
API? Oh no.
No, it was a private equity round. That's what I heard. I read in one of the magazines, and it was substantial. And they did that a couple of years ago, and that really, I think the investment community saw what they were doing and said, this has legs, and they're in here at the ground floor of something that's going to be big. This idea of internet virtual collaborative workflows, and they bet on them, and I think they're doing really well with it.
The two things I think that are really smart is that they've gone to the proper lengths to get qualified for security measures for all the Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies that require certain type of second and all those different security measures.
Huge. That is huge.
That's not a small thing to do, and I think it was very smart because now they can get a much bigger enterprise level operations. So I think that's good. And then for Resolve specifically, but also for other applications, now they have their own developer SDK. So
it's an API. What's the difference between an API and an SDK?
Software development kit is for the programmers, and an API, an application programming interface, is for people who want to integrate it into their software. That's, so, as I understand it, that's
outgoing versus incoming.
So yeah, I think one of the coolest things is that one of those like this is that the Resolve engineers actually integrated Frame.io directly into Resolve versus Frame.io making an app or making a panel for the application. So it's actually woven into the fabric, which they announced some other companies doing the same thing. Kino, can't remember those couple other ones.
LumaTouch, yeah.
So which is interesting because for me, one of the distinction things that I kind of hold in my head, and I may be wrong about it, is that the Adobe kind of model was each app is kind of its individual little island. And it's not that the apps are all built around Premiere. After Effects users are their own camp, and they're the people who do the web stuff that their own camp, and the camps talk to each other, but there's not a central hub. While it appears on the Final Cut side that the hub is always Final Cut 10, and that's where you live, and these other things like motion and compressor. I mean, compressor is a little bit of its own tool, but it seems like a more center hubs with Final Cut and hubs without a center in Adobe. Now, you know better than I do. So what's the Black Magic equivalent of that, Tony?
It's all in one app.
Is it? Yeah, it's all in one app. I mean, they have Fusion is the app that lives on its own and lives inside of Resolve, and they've been doing a lot these past couple of years trying to unify the code and unify like the playback engines. So
is it fair to say they have more of the Final Cut Pro 10 approach to the software suite than the Adobe approach to the software suite?
Yeah, if I had a bet, I would say that's probably
at the same time. Resolve is set up. I think Resolve is very post kind of overall friendly. I've been thinking about this a lot because the last week I've been editing a feature in Resolve, and it was one that was already, a rough cut was already done and has been handed off to me, and I'm trimming, and I am in 15 because I don't want to beta test 16 on a feature film, but I've just find tracks obnoxious and annoying, and I can't stand them. I hate having to think about. I hate having to stop and think about. Okay, if I make this edit, what audio tracks is it gonna overwrite, and how do I like separate the video and the audio so that they don't conflict with each other, and that takes extra brain power that I never use with Final Cut. I'm just thinking about making the edit, and the audio gets out of the way of each other, and I just keep working. So there's obviously that distinction, and now we've got the cut page, and Tony can talk a little bit more about the cut page. But the other philosophical difference between Resolve and Final Cut is I think Final Cut is all centered on the editing, and when you want something like color correction or audio, I look at it like the way I use it. It's like I open a drawer and I grab that tool I need real quick, tinker with it, and then close that drawer and I keep editing. Whereas Resolve is very much set up like here's the workflow you should follow. You know, you got your media, now there's a cut page, which is a little odd, but you're editing, you're coloring, you're doing your sound, and you're doing your effects, and then you're delivering, and they have that laid out for you. And of course you can jump over to that other page, but when you jump over to that other world, it is kind of like hopping into a different application. The benefit being your timeline's always there. But it's a different mentality than for me, you know. And of course, I can just stay in the edit page and Resolve. But if I want to do a little bit of color, I got to jump over to a separate page, which takes me out of what I'm doing in a way. because I could quickly make an edit and do a color adjustment and make an edit in Final Cut and then close the color when I'm done. Whereas Resolve, I'm jumping over the color, focusing on that, jumping back to the other page if I want to make an edit, jumping back and forth. So where I see Resolve really like where the workflow makes the most sense is film and television workflows, and especially if you've got teams. Of course, an individual can do all of it, but if you've got teams collaborating in one app, that's a really cool idea. But then you've got people like Jonathan. Did you guys see Jonathan Morrison's little tip he did for LumaForge?
Yeah.
Where he like color corrects and does the audio first, and then cuts. Like Final Cut is much more conducive to just the kind of like I'm just creating and I'm not thinking about the order I'm doing these steps in, and that opens it up to you can be disciplined, or you can just be experimenting, and I think they're both valid approaches, but they are different. And of course, like Bill, you already pointed out the difference between Final Cut and Adobe. But the cut page in Resolve is really interesting, and I'm going to shut up and let Tony talk more about it because he was demoing it.
Can I jump in before Tony does that? Because
Yeah.
I think you've said something that really resonated with me, and that is that an editor who starts in either of these worlds, if you start tracked, right, isn't that what we heard for the first 4 years of 10? I hate it because I miss my tracks. I can't figure out this magnetic stuff. It's driving me nuts. And a lot of editors dipped their toes into it and immediately ran away with their hair on fire screaming, I can't use this. And then now, Brad, you're almost the example of somebody who starts with trackless magnetic. And
Well, I did tracks for 12 years, but I started editing in '98 with Premiere 4. So I just converted.
Are articulating this thing about if you understand trackless really well, if that's myelinated into you, tracks become equally annoying. The same way that trackless was annoying for those traditional editors coming to 10 for the first time. I just find that fascinating. It all depends on your starting position.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my starting position, I'm a convert, obviously, and I've spent more time of my career in tracks than trackless, but I just see how much faster trackless is, so to go back is just painful. Even though people feel like they're in more control on a track-based timeline, they feel like they're more in control of what the clips are doing, and they're like, oh, don't do stuff for me, timeline. That's what bugs them about trackless. But once you kind of embrace it, it's like, man, it's managing so much for me with roles and everything that I don't have to think about that nonsense.
Okay, sorry for the interruption, Tony.
No, it's related to cut page, I think.
I totally agree. It's the same thing for me when I started cutting in Resolve. Just like, tracks, I hate this. But I think, you just get used to it. Just like I got used to working without tracks in Final Cut 10 because of the same thing. I cut in Media Composer for a while in the late 90s and then went to Final Cut 7 Classic like everybody did. It's just that process. It's just for me, I had to go over the wall again. I went over the wall for, as Chris Fenwick would say, to go trackless, and then I had to just climb back over the other side. So now it's not as bad. It's still annoying. Absolutely is still annoying because the trackless nature just affords you the ability to, like you said, Brad, just to think you have an idea and you can instantly just try it, right? And sometimes that's what you need. You have that idea and it's so small, it's a whisper of idea. You just want to try it real quick just to see, is this a possibility? And to have to put any other type of brain function to go, oh crap, I just erased something and now it's not playing the way I wanted to, and you went down this rabbit hole. So that's really, really nice. Although, it's not so bad. If you have a major complex timeline, like obviously a feature film with multiple audio tracks and multiple video tracks, that's going to get complicated. For the stuff I do, it's all short form, ad-based, anything under 10 minutes, really. Actually, anything under 5 minutes, to be honest. It's a little bit more flexible and easier for me. I do have tracks and I do have timelines that have, they're stacked pretty high. But for the most part, it's not too bad. But it still is a pain. And I think that's where Resolve is a little different in a way. It's kind of that hybrid between Premiere and Final Cut 10 in a way. They kind of got married and had a kid. There's some things that Resolve has that's very, very similar to the mindset of 10, but yet it's still living in a track world, right? Still living in that Premiere world. So the cut page is interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it yet. I like it. It is. I think it's an interesting way for them to try to redefine editing in their program because, like you said, it is. You have these complete workflow rooms or these complete workflow pages that you go into. You know, you're in the editorial page and you're doing it. It's got everything you need for editorial. But then, when you're ready to go to color, you're in a completely designed and tested color page, color workflow. But like you said, Brad, sometimes you just want to go and just try, just do a quick little tweak on color, and that's not conducive. That's when it kind of works against you in a way. So I think that's what they saw. They saw a need to say, how can we streamline, make this a little bit easier on a couple fronts? A beginner, the YouTuber, or somebody who just wants to quickly get in and do something. So there's a lot of interesting things in the cut page. They have the dual timelines. They're taking a lot of, it feels like, I don't know, but it feels like they're taking a lot of inspiration from Final Cut. Now there's one window, one viewer.
What they excoriated 10 for in the early days.
And that's an interesting, yes, and that's an interesting one. I never in Final Cut used the, what is it called? The something viewer?
Browser viewer.
Or whatever it is, yeah. I never turned that on, ever. But the other thing is, in Resolve, because I'm in 15, when, you can hover over clips in the bin, and you can even select in and out points. And then I'm in the habit of doing that, and then I hit W, but then it plops whatever's loaded into the viewer into my timeline. Yes. And it's been catching me. And I'm like, crap, and then I have to double click on the clip, and then it loads in there. Then I can bring it into my timeline. And it's just one of those like habit things for Final Cut that I'm so fast at, I don't think about it.
No, you just hover, in and out, drop. Hover, in and out, append. Hover, in and out, insert. And that's one of my requests as well, because it does get me, even now, still where I'm just quickly going through. The scrubbing is it's good in Resolve. But just in and out, and then you don't realize that you've got this clip from another bin that's loaded in the source view, and that gets dropped in. So yeah, I'm almost there with the double clicking just by muscle memory.
But then it'll be funny going back to 10 and you're double clicking on stuff you don't need to double click on. But the cut page is different, right? Because it's just thumbnails and there is no source viewer, so you can do that, or how does that work?
It's a hybrid approach. You have your list view, you have that new view where they kind of laid out like a film strip, but everything is a film strip view. And so I like how they have the metadata underneath there as well, where you can see frame size.
Right.
It's been a request of mine for Final Cut 10 for a long time. Film strip for everything with metadata.
With metadata, it's really easy to see, oh yeah, that's my 4K, that's my 2K, or whatever.
Sure.
What'd be really cool is if you could customize that metadata to where you could actually select, okay, I want to see all of this stuff instead of...
Keyword ranges in Final Cut with film strips like that would be awesome.
That would be dope, for sure. So yeah, you've got your 3 different views. It's not, you can't have the 4 or 5 or 6 bins open like you can in the edit page. It's really just makes you concentrate on one bin. You still have access to all your hierarchy of your bins.
Which I think is pretty cool. The hierarchy thing is neat. The way it's tucked away and it's not taking... In fact, in Final Cut, you can hide that side library view, right? But it would be nice that when you collapse that you could still have a drop down. That would be huge.
Yeah, that would be great. So that way you can still quickly go back if you wanted to.
Without having to pop that open.
Right, yeah. So that's an interesting take. It's, again, trying to focus you on one bin at a time. You still have to double click to switch between the one viewer from the source to the timeline. You still have to double click the clip. And so that's one of my requests, is not to double click. Like, just the moment your mouse is over there hovering over it, should just load it into the viewer and away you go. I mean, that's so much faster.
Does Resolve have hovering? I mean, the live skimmer?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. It does have it, but it's like, because that's what we're saying, because it's a hybrid approach, you can't just select something real quick and drop it in your timeline. like an in out and drop it in. You have to double click on it to load it in, and then you bring it in.
Right. So is it similar to Premiere's? Because Premiere's only works in the browser, from what I understand. It doesn't work in the timeline.
It's better than Premiere's.
Okay, that's interesting. That's what I meant.
Very, very responsive. I mean, it almost feels like you're in Final Cut 10 when you're scrubbing with it. It's very, very responsive. And once you double click on a clip, you can just keep going to any clip, hovering over, and it'll load it in the viewer. I'm sorry, the source.
I'd say it previews it in the viewer.
There you go. Yeah.
Because it's actually not loaded, and that's the gotcha that we're talking about. So because it's not loaded in the source viewer, if you're hovering over it and it's live and you're previewing it, when you go to drop something in your timeline, it'll drop whatever's actually loaded in the viewer. And that's what's been catching me this week multiple times. And I'm like, undo, and then, okay, double click. Now it's loaded in the source viewer. Now I can drop it in. So that preview is it's a little hard to follow if you haven't been playing in Resolve. Tony and I are kind of like, you guys are like, what are you guys talking about? But
no. What you're describing it very well, and it's one of those things that's muscle memory. I mean, editors who spend all their time in Resolve will obviously just do that as second nature after a while, and they'll not paying attention to it. But it is a different fundamental kind of structural thing. They added this on as a way to modernize and make Resolve friendlier to its users. Yeah. It doesn't feel like they planned it from the day one as part of the Resolve feature list, which 10 often feels like they did. Skimming and INO and WNQ and the single things all have a consistency of behavior, and that once you learn it for any one of those append or connect editors or whatever, you know them for all of them, and you don't have to think about it anymore. So it's a quick learn. This sounds like it'll be, but it'll take a little while, particularly if you're changing, which is what we're discussing, trying to change.
Yeah.
I went over to the Black Magic booth, I think it was Tuesday, and I was thinking, Tony's going to be on demonstrating Fusion. And I went over there, and he was demonstrating editing. I was so happy that I could talk to him about doing some editing, see how it works over there. I saw him and Chris Hawking over there together.
Yeah.
The question I had for you, Tony, is because I didn't finish when you were showing me stuff on Wednesday, and I didn't actually finish through the question I had about the cut page, because the cut page just hides audio, right? Like it's just kind of not there.
It's treating it like Final Cut 10 in a way.
And then if you're if you've got edits where the audio and the video line up, it shows you little waveforms. But if you've got JRL cuts, it just kind of looks like a video clip, and it just hides the audio, and you're like, I don't know where the audio is or how it's connected. And you jump over to the edit page, and you can now see your audio tracks. Yeah. And then what we were kind of looking at is, okay, what happens when you make a JRL cut? But then the other question is, what happens when you flip on the cut page? You do the magnetic, editing, because the cut page kind of has that. It doesn't have clip connections, but it has that magnetic behavior.
It's in ripple mode.
Yeah, it's in the ripple mode. But then what happens to a JRL cut when you flip some clips? Does it overwrite, or how does it handle, the audio that would be connected to that locked to that video clip?
I think that's something that they're still working on, and what it'll end up doing is just showing you a gap clip, I think, right now, to make it work in the cut page.
So it won't overwrite, but now you have extra slug slug on your left and right of the video clip. Yeah. Man, yeah. I mean, that's where you just really appreciate Final Cut's ingenuity and getting rid of tracks there.
Mm-hmm. And it totally is. This, like I said, this is an interesting experiment, because it will take, if you have, like in Final Cut, where you drop a clip in the main storyline and the audio is married to the clip, right, of interview. So they're doing something very similar in the cut page, where they'll kind of have track one will be like your main storyline, if you will. And when you drop an interview clip in there, that audio is married to that video clip. Now you can actually drop in other audio separately from that. But anytime you drop in a clip that's got linked audio, like for an interview, it's going to keep it in one contained clip. So you can move that one contained clip around. And when it comes to those JK and L cuts, it'll just show you a gap clip, and that's what it'll be in when you go to the edit page. But you'll see the audio now in its own track, still linked, but it's in its own track, and you'll see the gap clip as well. So how does it rectify the JKNL? I'm not sure how they're going to finalize that. So that's something I still got to work on.
That's fascinating, because I remember spending literally weeks talking on the internet to people about the idea of audio video containers as the standard for 10. And it was interesting back in 2011, 2012, and 2013, how it really took a while for people to get past, wait, you mean the audio isn't down below here and the video isn't all up here and it's all in one thing, and that's freaking me out. I can't handle that. And so it'd be interesting whether the experience of the people who have Touch 10 who are used to thinking like that will make it easier for Resolve to roll this kind of thing out, or whether the Resolve users who are coming exclusively from those track-based programs will have the same result they had when they tried to figure 10 out.
I think it is interesting. You know, when I was at the booth showing all the Final Cut 10 guys, they immediately got it. I love this.
Yeah,
and
I'm used to this.
I would show folks who are Resolve editors, and they're like, "Well, it doesn't have the power I need." I'm like, "Well, it's not really designed for that. It's different, you know." So it's interesting. It's like this is where Resolve is still that hybrid approach.
I honestly pray for the Resolve community that they don't have to go through 3 or 4 years of trying to tell people who don't understand, no, really, this is a good thing. This makes your work faster and easier. And when it clicks, it's going to be worlds better than what you're doing now. But getting them across that line, I hope it's not like it was for those of us who were in 10, who spent countless hours just saying,
hey, man, it forged friendships and that will last, lifetime and beyond.
Forever.
That's true.
I know. That's right.
So
we've been through battle and hell together.
Do you think in total there's more editors at this point editing with tracks versus Final Cut Pro 10? I mean, Final Cut, they announced 2.5 million last NAB. They did not announce any numbers so far in 2019. I'm going to presume it's about 3 million or more. Do you think the total Premiere, Avid, and Resolve editors that use tracks still outnumber Final Cut Pro 10 or not?
That's a hard thing to say. A, there's a lot of Final Cut Pro 10 people who have Resolve, like me and Tony.
Right.
So that's an interesting one. B, there are a lot of people who are using Premiere because there's a lot of Adobe CC subscribers, and I don't know how many of them pop it open every day. But but then you look at the broader world and you look at something like iMovie. How many people are editing video with iMovie every day? That's not a track-based world. So
Vegas still has a community behind it. In Hit Film. I mean, I'm not sure how many they have, but still.
I think the bottom line
Hit Film said something like, 3 million downloads? It's hard to quantify that because how many people downloaded it for free for the effects that they can use in other apps versus how many people are using it every day. But the Hit Film guys, there was a gal there from Hit Film. They were at the LumaForge party, and I saw them at the Faster Together stage stuff. So they had a presence at NAB, and they were, they were making the rounds.
Yeah, I interviewed them. I interviewed them, actually. I'm going to put the interview up next week. I got 3 interviews I did. I did them in LumaFusion and Filmic Pro.
But the fact that Resolve, the fact that they felt the need to, design this cut page tells me that they know that this is going to be a faster way to work. And I'm sure my assumption is they're going to build out the cut page more. And that eventually it'll get all the functionality that there won't be no need to have a cut page and an edit page, because that's a weird design thing anyway. It's just to me, it feels like a temporary, solution to kind of build it out and build out the ideas and develop it and get people comfortable with it. Boiling the lobster slowly as opposed to trying to throw it in the hot water. The frog, I guess it's the frog in the water. So and it's also for me validation, because I've been saying for years, look, Adobe and Blackmagic, they aren't stupid people. They're very intelligent people there. They can see advantages, and they're eventually going to move over to a very similar paradigm. And I had people saying, "Are you sure? How do you know that? Do you have inside?" I'm like, "I don't have any inside information, but it's just obvious that this is the future." And I can see him starting to borrow ideas. I thought in 2011 that it would take 5 years before we started seeing people copying a lot of this functionality. I was wrong. It took a lot long. It took 8 years. So, but I thought people would get over the hate of Final Cut Pro 10 a little bit quicker than they did. I wanted to talk about another cool idea that they threw into Resolve, which we have this functionality with the continuous playback in the browser in Final Cut, but they have like they're like, oh, we were inspired by searching for tape. I think it's ironic that they say it used to be a lot faster to review your material on tape than clips, and I'm like, that's not true.
Said only someone who never had to work with tape decks.
Tape. Yeah, I was like, that's definitely not true. I logged. I remember on the Avid having to log and digitize tapes, and that was incredibly painful compared to importing your clips. But they kind of took this idea of continuous playback with film strips and Final Cut and reordering them, and they have this new little feature that they say is inspired by tape, which I guess kind of is, but it's really more dynamic than that. What can you describe that for us, Tony? How does that work? What's it called, and how does it work?
So it's called source tape, and that's one of the cool things that I'm excited about, or I'm excited to see where it could go. But basically, the idea is that you have your bin with 10 clips, 100 clips, doesn't matter, right? It'll take all the clips that you have in that bin that's open and aggregate it into the viewer, laying it all out for you in the viewer, right? So all the clips back to back. You can actually see your clips in the viewer denoted by these white lines, so you know where your clips are on. Whatever your playhead is, it's going to be selecting that clip that's active, that you're actively viewing. You can also reorder your bin, and it'll.
Is that your delivery person showing up?
I think that's the delivery person showing up. So there's a lot of cool things that I want to add to that. I think that would make it more Final Cut-esque, but that could make it very, very powerful for organizing and for viewing. Like, I would love to be able to add markers and colors to clips right inside the source tape, like it's done in the bin, and then to be able to filter by those features as well to be able to reorganize your viewer. So that's stuff that I would love to see.
Limit down a little bit.
Yeah, so you can, like, quote unquote, dynamically organize
Well, just think of how cool they'll be 8 years down the road.
yeah.
They're 3 years into it. If they have another 5, they can build out a lot of cool stuff.
The cool things go ahead.
So that with some of their neural engine stuff, I think it's interesting where they're taking where you can do fast preview and preview clips, and it'll dynamically change the speed based on the length of the clip that's you're actually seeing. So stuff like that combined with the organizing, I think could be pretty interesting. Hopefully, we'll see. I don't know.
The fact that you can select an in and out point and just drop those clips in is interesting to me. But you can't select multiple in and out points on that source tape right now.
Range-based in and outs or multiple in and outs is one at a time, one section at a time. Let me go get this recording. You guys chat on 1 second.
All right.
So interestingly, we're talking about tracks. I was talking to Steve Martin at the Faster Together stage exhibitors area. And he said to me, I don't mind tracks. I don't mind tracks at all. And I'm the same way. I mean, we
all started with tracks. Well, I don't think there's an editor out there who didn't learn on a track.
We're talking about in 2019. I mean, I still use tracks constantly in Logic, and I can find them fine. The distinction I make is I like tracks for audio, and I like the magnetic timeline for video. But for audio, I don't mind tracks. I wish there was a way to make a hybrid that you could select. I mean, they almost have those when you do the rolls in Final Cut Pro 10, where you do the strata, and it's just like a track, whether you call it a roll. It divides them all up, and a lane. So it's almost there. It'd be nice to have a ability.
Although I when they introduced lanes, there were some editors who said, I'm going to always have this on. I never have lanes on, except for when I'm just double checking that there isn't a clip that was misassigned a role. So that's the only time it's like a double check thing, because it snaps them all into those lanes.
Sure.
And then I'm like, oh, that clip that should have been sound effects is still labeled dialogue 1 or something. So it's a great preview thing for me, but I find that the automatic organizing, the way it just works by default, and every clip kind of, comes to the center. That works great for me. Luma Fusion, and maybe where Steve Martin was kind of going, because I know he likes what Luma Touch is doing with Luma Fusion, the iPad editing app. They have a hybrid approach in a way where they've got tracks, and now they're adding little track header things so you can mute tracks and things like that. But they also have clip connections, and they also have a magnetic timeline. So that's an interesting hybrid. The problem I have with tracks and Resolve is just that whole, am I going to be taking a bite out of, like if you're trimming this way and then you back off, it like takes bites out of stuff. It overwrites things and it erases things and it collides with things.
Right, which you can't have, obviously, right?
Which is where, is just
you need
where
another layer of effort to avoid messing things up. And why have another layer of effort if it's? I mean, to me, what I'm hearing in my mind as you guys are talking about this, and it makes perfect sense, is contextual. I'm doing that interview thing where I'm talking to a lot of editors who work in a lot of different areas, and it's fascinating to me how people in different parts of this industry think so differently, and how a feature editor conceptualizes what they're doing in a way that a commercial editor does not, and the commercial editor conceptualizes things in a different way than an editor who's doing a documentary conceptualizes things. It's just what I'm trying to do in my discussions and talking and sometimes arguing on the internet is I'm trying to make less and less preconceived notions about how things should work, because I'm constantly astonished at how differently two people see the same task, and when they explain why they see it differently, suddenly you're going, something, if I had your brief, if I had to do what you have to do, I would stop doing it the way I do it, and I would do it the way you do it.
Sure.
So that internal, this is how I organize. And actually, the things that are fascinating me most about Final Cut Pro 10 right now is I'm into some really complicated stuff. I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned on your program, Richard, or something, but I'm doing this thing where I'm making a virtual set of standards for a huge corporation to send out to all their editors, and they have hundreds of editors touching their stuff all over.
Right.
And it's like a art director's standards book, but for video instead of print.
Sure.
And so we're doing this in video, and the complexity of the structure of the project is so daunting. And I thought I would never go back to these timelines that had 70 clips high. But at this stage, I need all 70 to be changeable and touchable. And I know I'm going to eventually collapse them into smaller granular units, but it's unlike anything I've ever done on a video timeline before. And so that's where, for me, without the tools of without the timeline index to find things in the middle of this visual clutter, without so many of these new tools that 10 brought to the table that I probably never used on another project before in this way, suddenly having it kills tremendous amounts of friction in being able to get this job done. And I'm really enjoying it rather than struggling with it because of these ideas. Now, I've had these ideas for 8 years. But I didn't have a project that really leveraged that. Now, I've had projects that leverage multicam heavily. I've had projects that leveraged audio and rolls and things like that heavily. I've never had something that had true structural timeline complexity that 10 is just blazing through for me because of how it works.
Here's a question, Bill. Are you using like the clip skimmer for like managing, like going through and previewing those individual video layers?
There's two places that my mind goes to when I'm working on this project. If I'm working, I have to work structurally because they're constantly moving elements around. It's like, are we going to talk about how the standards for type should work here, or we can talk about it over here, or over the here, or we're going to talk about it in all three places, and if so, how do we keep it from getting repetitive? Because we don't want to tell these people the same lesson over and over again in three different places.
Right.
So maybe it's over here now, and maybe it needs to be back over there. You can imagine that magnetic vertical structures are huge for that. All right, I'll just drag it over here and let's see how it feels. Does it feel right? Does it feel? Do I undo that? Or let's take it over there and see if that works. That kind of stuff is really good. When I'm working in a module section, though, I think differently about how that works.
Absolutely.
And there I'm turning on or off and timing the appearance of elements to build things like this will help people build an ad. So we're giving them not just type specs, but actual layout specs about how the ads need to be coherent in their appearance, no matter which shop works on building the ad for which particular need for that branch of the business. It's really a fascinating process.
What do we think? What do we think we're going to see at WWDC? Anything Final Cut Pro related? I mean, maybe a preview of the Mac Pro, maybe a preview of that new display. There was a rumor it was going to be 31.6 inches. Mm-hmm. Do you think we're going to see anything Final Cut Pro related at WWDC, which is unusual?
Well, not unusual for launching a Mac Pro, because when they previewed the Mac Pro, the 2013 model, they showed Final Cut Pro.
Did they?
At WW, yeah.
But did they show
Phil
a new
Schiller
version?
Introduced,
a new version?
They didn't show a new version, but they showed Final Cut Pro. Like, they talked about it and they had screenshots. Like Phil Schiller said, "Wouldn't you want to be this editor?" I remember that specifically. I think if they show off a Final Cut Pro, we'll at least see press photos. If they show us a Mac Pro, which I don't know why they wouldn't show a Mac Pro and a new display, because that's going to be exciting for developers.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm sure it'll ship later in the year, but I would think we at least see press photos of Final Cut Pro. And we've also, a couple of years ago, before they released 10.4, they pre-announced that at WWDC that there was an upcoming version of Final Cut Pro that would support a 360 video.
Right.
So I think Tony's like looking, what? It was 20.
I thought they previewed at one of their October events. Was that the same thing? Or
No. They didn't preview Final Cut Pro. Actually, I take that back. They did have people there. It was after Tim Dashwood was acquired, and they did have a VR set up at WWDC for people who were there to look at it 10.4, but way before we saw it at the Creative Summit. And they were specifically highlighting the VR functionality, like using a VR headset. And that was at WWDC, and there was a report written up about that. So we saw like a screenshot of the 360 stuff and a beta build or whatever of Final Cut. So I don't know if they'll have anything exciting like that, possibly, but I do at least anticipate there being some shots of Final Cut Pro running on a new Mac Pro display, and I think we will. I don't know why they wouldn't. Now, will it ship at WWDC? Absolutely not. I think that the Mac Pro and Final Cut Pro will ship at the end of the year. And I also kind of going back to what we were talking about, how it's just taking 8 years before we got Premiere Rush and Resolve has a cut page, and people are starting to catch on to, oh, this is the future, magnetic timeline and whatnot, whether there's tracks or not. I also think that especially because it's been quiet this year so far with Final Cut Pro, other than the small release, I think that the Final Cut team, this is just me theorizing, I think they're poised. Anyway, I think they're in a position to move the puck or move the field post further down the field. With whatever with 10.5, I guess.
Well, yeah, 10.5. Yeah.
I think 10.5 will have some. We got with 10.3, we got the magnetic timeline 2.0. I don't know if we'll get a magnetic timeline 3.0 yet, but I'm sure there's a magnetic timeline 3.0 with more functionality and taking some of these concepts of pinning things, like how many of us want to pin things to the actual timeline itself, not just markers but clips. How many of us want, like how many of us have to do these videos where you have like a little watermark or website or whatever, and how awesome would it be to have generators and titles that were flexible and would cover the whole timeline or a selected range of clips, no matter how long or short they get. I mean, there's so many ideas that were started with the release of Final Cut Pro 10 that I'm sure the Apple team has been working on for over 10 years. And we know that because some of those ideas came from iMovie, like the skimmer. So how much more do they have to innovate? So as other people are starting to catch up or starting down this path, I think that the Apple, the Pro Apps team is just going to move further down, and that's kind of why, like, you'll see some people posting. Obviously, there's been videos posted on YouTube about switching from Premiere to Resolve, which is understandable. It's going to save you money, for one thing. But there's been some people say, oh, Resolve has these features that I've been asking Final Cut to do for so long, and they're not there, like dupe detection or whatever. I maybe I'll switch to Resolve, but I'm like, Final Cut's just going to move further ahead, so I don't. And kind of like Tony, like I use both applications, so I don't have a switch mentality in my head. I'm going to switch to Resolve and abandon Final Cut. That'll never happen, because I fully believe in the team at Apple that they're going to just keep innovating and keep pushing forward. They're very passionate about that.
Well, and we haven't talked about the fact that everyone knows that sometime, as you alluded to, Brad, this year there will be new hardware. And when new hardware comes out, the capabilities, whatever that hardware looks like, its capabilities will allow for a bunch of changed features in the way software runs in it. So I don't know whether that's, I make things up because I don't know. Stacked GPUs, a lot of the bottlenecks right now that keep people from being able to do massively complex operations, multiple tracks and things like that, lots of internal processes, that will fade, and it'll get less and less of a problem for the hardware as the hardware revs generation by generation. If this turns out to be a substantial bump and the people who buy the new Mac Pros get some type of a ton of horsepower, although I don't know what that look like, and we've all heard about the issues with chip deliveries and what they can put in the hardware. Those things will constrain what they can do, I'm sure, but they know more about that than virtually anybody else on the world.
Speaking of that, I have a solution for legacy media.
Oh, tell me. You
is that your old PowerBook?
Look at all those ports.
Yes.
Ports where we're going.
Look
we don't
how thick
need
it
ports.
is.
Yeah, I've got one of those too.
So here's the thing that I'm curious about, which is what I typically do. 10.5 probably will come out in 2019. Final Cut Pro 10.5. I'm wondering if they're going to release it before the Creative Summit, and I'll tell you why. Because if they don't, it's going to be a 2-year cycle between major releases. I have a feeling they might release 10.5 sometime whenever they want to, and then have an update at the Creative Summit with additional features, rather than wait all the way till the Creative Summit and have a 2-year span between major releases, which they haven't done recently. What do you guys think?
In my mind, the single most successful and laudatory thing that Apple does as a company is they very much live on a ready, aim, fire cycle. They do not, like many other companies today, rely on a ready, fire, aim cycle. And at least when they deliver hardware and software, I'm not saying they don't make mistakes, they make mistakes. But generically speaking, when it ships, it's ready and solidly ready. I'm astonished. How many times have each of us updated 10 automatically in the last 2 years? And how many times have we had more than a very minor problem that's gone in a week? I mean, it's astonishing considering how much work and change there is in this stuff. That there's
how many computers over, how many people have 2012 iMacs or MacBook Airs or whatever that are running this stuff, and we'll see, you see little issues, but Yeah, it's
they're usually
not
minor.
catastrophic.
Right. I have never tried to open my timeline and had it fail to open. Now, I know I hear edge cases of people who do run into those problems when they update, but it's not massive, and you don't see that on the ABC News at night. Apple released an upgrade and it failed massively, and everybody's
Conan O'Brien.
That was 2011.
2011, so 9 years ago, essentially, or 8 years ago.
It's really spoiled me because for that same reason, where I remember back in the classic days where I would stay one OS behind and a version 2 behind for everything. And I would plan out, I had 3 or 4 machines that I would have to update simultaneously. So I would plan it out. Okay, the week of this month, I'm going to wipe everything and reinstall. And it's kind of vanished those times. It's like now it's just, okay, you know what, let's upgrade. And I mean, I'm super spoiled to be able to do that and not worry.
Well, speaking of that, I've been waiting for a year for Resolve 15 to get stable enough that people can use it as a regular editor. And then they put out 16. Now I have to wait another year before it because I don't want to be just jumping in and learning something and it's unstable and I have to say I'm going to abandon this now.
What is the stability? Because I've had Resolve open for a week. Well, I never shut it down on my computer, and I've been editing this whole week, and I've not had a crash.
Well,
Resolve 15 is solid. So whatever the latest update, the 15.3.
Okay.
Or 4.
Yeah, I would say jump in with 15.3 right now.
Okay, so avoid 16 still beta, I guess, right?
16 is still beta. I've actually went ahead and put my machines on 16 because I love my own integrations and other stuff it has. But 15.3, you can download 15.3 right now.
Okay, so it's finally getting there to the point where I can depend on it.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe people are playing around on the Fusion page and having issues, or Fairlight or something. I've just been on the edit page, and I've had it open. Like I actually didn't shut my computer, or it was last night, but I've had it open the whole week. And I've been hopping in and working, throughout the day, and same project open, and I've yet to see it do something really weird.
So, Brad, does that mean you're going to have a new documentary called On the Tracks?
No, we've already talked about this. It's called Back on Track.
Back on Track.
The DaVinci Resolve story. That's the one. Yeah, no, it's fine. This project was just handed to me that somebody already cut it in Resolve, it's fine. I like I said, there's been pain that I've had to get through, and I wouldn't choose to set up a project this way. One of the interesting things, just coming from a Final Cut world, is the person who did the rough cut, he's more of a DIT, so all the bins were organized by day and then card number, which for me as an editor, I'm like, I want my bins as scenes, and the nice thing about Final Cut with keywords and smart collections, and there are smart bins in Resolve, but I'll tell you why I was having an issue with those. But the fact that I can kind of, I can maintain and tuck away the real or day information, because every once in a while a director says, "Oh, I know we shot this thing on this day," and you're trying to find it, it's not in your scene event in Final Cut or whatever, and being able to tag that's fine. But for the most part, it doesn't really matter to me what day something was shot on. What I care about is grouping things together by scenes or where it goes in the story. So this was just obviously a DIT is going to organize it that way because that's the way they think of backing up footage, but and then what I thought, okay, maybe I can make a bunch of smart bins. As I cut each scene, I'll take that footage, because I was having, clips that were in different bins that were part of the same scene because they spanned different cards, and that was getting really obnoxious. But the problem with the smart bins is I'm going to create a scene number, and it's a smart bin for a scene. And, it's like scene 1, well, scene 10 and 11 and 13 and all of those, and 100 and
Hoist 100 on the Boolean world.
They all show up, and so then I'm trying to add a bunch of filters to get rid of those scenes, and then I'm by the time I'm doing that, it's just so I'm not at the point where I can reorganize, but it's one of those things I really appreciate about 10. And of course, that could be communicated. Hey, when you bring in stuff, put it into, do it this way.
Sure.
It's hard to kind of go back and do all that work at this point. It's easier to just go along the time.
The batch renaming functions in 10. Oh, that's not, you're not in 10. You're in the Resolve.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is the stuff was synced, which I like that Resolve doesn't, like when it syncs audio, it attaches it to the video clip. And you don't have this kind of weird thing where you've got a video clip, an audio clip, and a synchronized clip. Tony looks frozen on my screen with an interesting expression. I don't know about your guys.
He might be frozen.
No, he is frozen.
So one of the neat.
So anyway, project organization is obviously I'm passionate about, but Final Cut makes a lot of those things: batch renaming, reorganizing, smart collections. They're just so fast and easy.
Well, speaking of that exact thing, so one of the new features that Kino has is paste and rename. So you can select a bunch of clips on a camera card, and you can go to wherever you want to and right-click on a new folder or whatever, paste them into this new folder and rename them in the Finder, organize them the way you want, because I do that a lot myself now. I love that feature. You can also rename with the original clip name as well. You can, obviously they'll be sequential and stuff. So paste and rename is a great feature of Kino. I'm a big fan of that. And Kino now works with Frame.io. It's going to be.
Somebody had an issue that came up. I think his name is Jonathan Edwards. Had an issue on Final Cut Pro 10 editors that he was pointing out where, because some of these consumer naming conventions are just like C001, C002, it can create problems relinking media. And he was having issues where it's like, okay, it's the same clip name, Final Cut's relinking to the wrong clip.
Right.
All of a sudden the time code's changing, it's doing all these funky things, which obviously I feel like these databases just need to get smarter, because on a feature film, I do not rename any original media, because I know I rename everything in Final Cut, because I know that at some point I need to go back to it. Unfortunately, a lot of the smarter cameras, like an Alexa or an Red, they have a reel and a clip number at the beginning of each clip, and then they have a random identifier code. And I don't want to use that when I'm editing, but it makes it easier to relink and sort through things. But when you're shooting on some of these cameras, those names can be the same, and relinking can be a huge problem. What I want to see from and I've talked to you about this before, Richard, is on an operating system level, I just want operating systems to get smarter and identify different files. And you could have Untitled 1 10 times in the same folder, but the operating system is smart enough to know that that's a completely different Pages document or something like that. That what it's named, what I see it named in the Finder is not actually how the hard drive or the computer identifies the file.
Well, that'll be as soon as they can number things sequentially the right way.
Well, I'm saying it doesn't matter what it's named or whatever. It's the operating system is smart enough to recognize, and the way it's written on a hard drive is smart enough to recognize that these are distinct files, even if they have the same file name.
No, I understand.
That's why, Richard, when I used to talk to you about the fact that I don't do much of any Finder renaming, I'm a little bit more on Brad's side of this kind of an idea. I literally, the only use I have for any folders in my world is just one collection point, so that all the disparate elements of a project go in one thing. I don't even care what they're named in there. And that gets backed up with the rest of the project eventually, so that as long as that folder is on the root level, the database in 10 can find anything inside of that. But beyond that, I don't really care what the folder structure of anything is.
Well, but here's the thing. It's not an idea of renaming. It's the idea of naming before you create a Final Cut Pro library. If you talk to the people that do feature films that use Final Cut, they all organize in the Finder. All of them do. Sure they do. Mike Mansdorf does. Yes, they do.
No, it's the DIT backup is maintaining the card structure, the card, all the original media, the way it was named. You on a feature film, you do not rename anything. You organize things
in the Finder,
folders.
In folders.
Yeah, but it's literally for archival purposes. Once you bring it into your editor, that's where you rename things and organize things in a traditional editor and bins. But yeah, no feature film that I know, because you do not want to rename, like you can't rename
You organize things in the Finder. That's
right,
what
but
I meant talking
about. You don't need rename red clips.
Well, I don't know anything about red clips. I'm talking about you organizing the Finder.
Or raw files. You cannot rename them.
I totally understand the instinct, and I think there is some value, but I think the value has diminished over time with programs like 10 that work in its internal database for all of its management. I mean, 10 doesn't look outside to care about that. Once you import and folder names come into the database in 10, if you choose to work that way, at that point, 10 doesn't care about them. Now, that doesn't mean people shouldn't use them. And I'm if anything that makes you feel more comfortable about the state of being able to find and manipulate things, you should use, because that's how you like to do things.
Well, 50 hard drives, hundreds.
Right, listen, hundreds, I understand all that.
Hundreds and hundreds of libraries. I'm not going to open up Final Cut Pro one library at a time looking for a clip. I want to do it in the Finder.
But see, I don't ever have to go through that. I don't ever have to do that, because I find the sparse disk bundle for that drive, open it, and everything in 10 relinks.
If you don't know what library it's in, Bill, you can't. You have to open up dozens and dozens of libraries looking one at a time. That's ridiculous. I can use NeoFinder and search across all my hard drives, dozens and dozens of hard drives, go exactly where the clip is, what drive it's on. Then I can launch that and launch the library.
And I can do all those same things using the Arctic Whiteness products with the same thing. It's just two different ways to get there. It's like saying you're taking the right fork and we're taking the left fork. You will still get to the town you're going to. And so I understand that people want to do it the way they feel comfortable with. And I'm a great advocate of that. Everybody should be able to do it the way they want. But that's not the same as saying that it needs to be done that way for efficiency. Both can be efficient doing it opposite ways. That's part of the magic of computers.
Well, I'm saying that Final Cut can't search across all my hard drives.
No, and that's where I think
that's what I'm saying.
It comes down to, like, do you use like Keyflow Pro? Do you use Kino? Do you use there's these tools, even Edit Ready to some degree, are these tools of prepping and organizing your drives in a way that's easy to search later. I'm just saying on a feature film you can't. Those types of files you can't rename, because you're going to have to be relinking in another application later, and you don't want to mess up any of the folder structure, any of that hierarchy.
Brad, in Resolve, you can actually rename clips and display the named clip or display the file name clip in Resolve.
Right.
You can actually batch rename files and put whatever naming structure you want.
But can you show the machine language original asset ID? You won't be able to read it. That
you can code it now.
Character,
you can probably code that.
32 character machine language name.
But you're talking
really
about
is the name.
But you're talking about the same thing as like batch renaming in Final Cut. Well, the only problem is Final Cut's funny. It has a metadata field for original media, or original name. But for whatever reason, after you relaunch the library, it blanks out. So you rename the clip and it loses I don't know why, but I've always had that issue. Whereas it sounds like in Resolve, it maintains that original name.
It never renames it. It'll actually rename it for you inside the app, and you can choose to show you what you renamed it or what the original file name is.
Right. And I batch rename in Final Cut all the time, same kind of thing. What I don't do is rename in the Finder, but at the same time, I understand why you might want to do that, especially depending on what camera you're shooting on, and depending on how you want to search and organize.
Well, I think it's more
because Richard's
in a collaborative
right.
Circumstance. If you're in a collaborative circumstance, it makes sense for people in your office to be able to get overt metadata that they can see and parse in their brain. I get that. But a lot of editors don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. So it makes no sense for me to rename folders or put things in folders when launching a volume through a sparse disk bundle or a camera archive in 10, which is the same thing as a sparse disk bundle, basically. You launch them, and then the entire database of 10 populates with all of your user metadata, different from the camera metadata. And then you're back with all of your overt keyword collections and all the rest of that stuff. And it's just simple.
We have the folder structure just because of people. We have we'll bring in freelancers. So I need to be able to say, go to that folder on that project.
Totally get that. Totally get that.
Else you need. And even passing to, like, I'll bring in Ryan Wilburn a lot of times to help with some stuff.
Right.
And so everything is unified. So when we're talking on the phone or on Skype, he's not saying, where is it at? Or I'm trying to search it and I can't find it. It's like, here's a folder that it's in. It's always in that same folder.
Oddly, I will give you an anecdote from that database project that I'm working on. I was talking to Mike Matsdorf about it, and I was expecting him to be the most rigid namer out of all the people that I talked to because of his history with working on Focus and all those big movies, and thinking, he's going to do it the Hollywood way. He's going to utterly be structured. And he turned out in the interview I did with him to be the most unstructured in the things that we were talking about. And he blew my mind.
Matsdorf is an ad. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, he does those things when he's working for those kind of clients. I mean, he's sitting there serving the client.
Sure.
But when he's working on his own stuff, when it doesn't have to, it's like the whole other side of his brain takes over, and he uses almost none of that. It was really fun talking to him. That's been the joy of this project, is my expectations keep getting blown up at every turn. Oh, I know how she'll organize because I know kind of her personality. Totally different. I was like, wow.
And I change organization structures depending on what I'm working on. Some things, everything's self-contained in the library. Some things, everything's managed externally. My favorite thing to do is feature films, and the organization for that is very simple. It's usually whatever the DIT does is usually just, here's the day, here's the card number. Like, those are the folders. That's it. And then in Final Cut, I add in all that extra metadata, and I usually will link to that media external. But I also love the fact that Final Cut can do hard links. So I actually kind of like having some libraries that, it's like, oh, I'm going to hand off this scene, or I'm going to hand off a final edit to somebody else to just kind of do color or sound. And I'll create a self-contained, internally managed library, but I'm doing it on the same drive with hard links, as opposed to having to wait and copy everything over. So instantly, boom, I have this library. Now I can copy that library off to a shuttle drive, hand it off to that person for whatever, thing that needs to be media managed. But, on the documentary, I think I just let Final Cut externally manage it, but it was like, when it was basically by date, when was the footage shot. And, it all depends. I think it's kind of like when you're thinking about making a movie and you're, should I shoot it in scope or should I shoot it in flat? Should I shoot it this aspect ratio? Should I do, does it need to be stereo surround? It all comes down to, well, what's the story? What's the project? What are the needs for that? And I'm going to base it off of that. And I'm not going to force one way of working onto every type of thing that I do. And that's where I think collaboration, again, if Final Cut cracks that nut, I hope that the way they solve collaboration is very flexible, because the way I see Resolve, Premiere, and Avid handling it serves kind of one type of way of working, which is, really the TV and movie industry, and not students, and not, ad agencies, and not teams like that. So I think it's the same thing. All of this organization that we're talking about, Final Cut's wonderful. In the early days, it was not wonderful because it was like everything had to go into those events, event folders. Like, it had to be stored there. And as libraries have evolved, it's been wonderful that you can choose target destinations of where you want your media to go. You can be inside the library, you can be outside the library, you can just link to stuff outside the library, and of course we'd like to see more flexibility in terms of where we're caching files and where we're storing content.
Absolutely.
But that
I don't know. You
top level stuff may excite you. What excites me from talking to people are finally you get to have 3 keyword collections, and you're working on your scary movie, and it's creepy, creepier, and creepiest. And you get to put whatever you want under those tags that resonate with you as the filmmaker. And then when you need creepy, you go to creepy, and then you decide in the next scene you want more emotional intensity, so you mine creepier. And then toward the end, when you're finishing and you're about to cut somebody's head off, you mine creepiest. Yeah. That's the thought process that is changeable when you have a system like this. Yeah. And this is one of the hardest things for me, because I in all these interviews, I can see the ones who are thinking outside of those boxes, and they're not, they're using keyword tags of colors, and the colors mean something to them, but they don't mean something to anybody else. But they have just broken down the rigidity. They've thrown away how you should do it, and they try to figure out how to do it.
I think the biggest thing is because you have a version of metadata tagging in Premiere. It's not that great. And you've got keywords. You've got a keyword manager in Resolve. You can do smart collections in Resolve. You can do a lot of the same things, but the difference is or smart bins, is the range-basedness of the metadata tagging. Yeah. Right. What that allows you is the ability to dynamically organize. So you have a dynamic structure that can expand and contract, like you said, based on how you want to name it and how you want to organize it.
Yeah, because creepier could be a line, it could be a look, it could be an interaction. All of those things can live under creepier, and as the editor, it's carte blanche. Sound effects, you've got this sound of the door open.
Yeah, range basis allows you to make those new quote unquote subclips, but they're metadata subclips, and they're dynamically
coalesce them into a bucket you can find instantly as you need it in the inspiration of the moment.
And that's
Richard, I think this is on your list, a keyword editor. There's one in Resolve, right? But being able to you can create a bazillion keywords, and as we get to the era where computers are smart enough to, use machine learning to identify everything in your shot, right, the keyword editor is going to be absolutely crucial, because maybe I don't care that there's a cat in the shot, but the machine learning thing picked up that there's a cat in the shot. So I have this kind of little menu or little pop-up thing that I can go into, and I can turn off keywords so they don't display in my browser that I don't want.
That's what I'm excited about with Resolve. The neural engine of finding faces that allows you to name those characters, and you can also solve for the errors. So it says, I found these people, I'm not sure who they belong to. You can, this person is that, and
Apple has that technology with photos. So it's like, come on, why is it not in? And I think one of the content auto analysis was one of the big headliners with Final Cut 10 in 2011, and auto analysis is a thing I keep off because it just was so slow. And how much do I really care that there's 2 people in a shot when I can look at a thumbnail and see that there's 2 people in a shot? So I'd like
I don't
to see
use that usually.
I mean, but if content auto analysis got faster on import, and it was tagging things that are more relevant, like who's in the shot, where was the shot taken, what was, what time of day, those kinds of things, and then I have a keyword editor that I can decide what is relevant to me and what's not.
What would be good is if you, like Resolve, where you could actually tell, right, and not just global import. I think that's kind of nice, because some clips you may not want it to process.
Yeah.
Just ignore these, but work only on these clips.
Well, in Final Cut, you could bring it in and you can select the clips and say, analyze these clips.
Oh, okay.
So,
but it just so slow. It was like, and what it was telling me was just not that useful.
When we went to a unified library, they had to change was it the database they had to change, or what exactly?
Lots of things.
Lots of things. So you think that's going to have to happen again in order to get true collaboration? I think so. A major shift like that?
At least there might be a system where I have a library and I turn it into a shared library, and that shared library has a different database than my personal library. or maybe all libraries get shifted over where they have the potential to just turn that on or off, or lock people in or out of your library. The way I've envisioned like library sharing is much more people are able to go in and see what events that I've elected to let them see, and they can pull things out or put things in. And when they want to share something with me, it's like an airdrop message, pops up. Tony wants to share this, clip or add this clip to this event, and I'm like accept or decline or off put that for later.
No.
Well, like if I got a snobby, I got an annoying producer I've got a producer who's like sends me, or a client who sends me a cut and I really don't want to see it, or somebody on my team says I know they have terrible choice in music and I'm like, nope, that's not going to my library.
Well, whenever I talk,
that's powerful. If you could, say for example, you have somebody ingesting and then somebody else organizing that, and then be able to merge that right away, that would be huge.
Whenever I talk to Avid people, I don't know if it's still like this, but they were talking about bin locking and stuff, and they have to actually tell the person to unlock a bin. Either go to their edit suite or call them on the phone or text them to actually.
I think they can look they can still grab stuff from the bin.
Right. But I mean,
they can't make edits to it. See, my thing is kind of like my own library. I want it to always be sort of locked. And I just choose events that I share with whoever I want. Absolutely. And they can see things and they can pull those things out. And then if they want to add stuff in. So like if I'm, that way it can be very dynamic. If I'm working on a feature film with a colorist and a sound person and a producer, I can plot projects or clips that are specific that they need into those events. They can get notified even that, hey, this event that you have access to just got new media or whatever, and then there's because all the medias would be linked externally in this case anyway, then it's just stuff that they're pulling in and out and they're bringing into their library, making changes, and then when they want to send that project back to me, or like an assistant editor who wants to share an event, I just organize this day's footage. I want to. For me, yeah. They drop it onto the library, the event onto the library, and then I get a thing that says boom. And the save for later thing is also huge too, because maybe right now I don't want to be distracted with an import. I'm still working. Save for later, and then I have a little queue list, and I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to bring those things into my library. So I like.
What would you do, Brad, in a situation where you're not the primary stakeholder, though, in that kind of with that kind of tool?
Well, so an assistant editor would have their own library.
No, not saying an assistant editor. I'm saying the producer. What if the producer is the only one with, and he will say, you need to work on this scene today from 4 to 7 p.m. and that's all you can work on, and you can't look outside of that. Are you okay with that kind of locking system where you can lock, where a primary stakeholder can lock subsidiary stakeholders out of the ability to affect things? I mean, this is great for the editor as the central focus of things, and we all as editors believe that is an appropriate thing. But we are getting into a lot of producer editor type projects where the producer editor may be hiring an editor and then disallowing that editor editorial control.
That makes a lot of sense to me, though, because the producer's in charge and they're saying, here's what you need to focus on, and I've given you the assets you need. Go off and work. The thing is, there's so many different scenarios. This is kind of why I feel like my own library needs to be my master, and a sound guy and a colorist and everybody, they would have their, in my mind, they would have their own kind of libraries where they're working. And then we can because what do we need to do? We need to be able to pass things back and forth, and we need to be able to get things without having to stop that person from working. We need to be able to grab it from them. Right. So you would have to have a discussion. I imagine you would throw up a big whiteboard and you would figure out who are all the different people are, what are all the different things they would need, and you would be constantly having to reevaluate it. But if they're in control of their own little library, their own little world, then you're not having somebody come in and just like renaming all your files the way you don't like it, or like deleting stuff out of your library that you still need, which is, I think, in a collaborative environment is something that could totally happen with bin locking. You've shut down your or you've closed out your Avid system for the day, and then the night editor comes in and they decide that they're just going to start deleting some of your sequences and renaming some of your stuff. This is something I guess now that Steve Bays is no longer at Apple, I could probably say is Steve. When I talked to him about collaboration, he said people are really shitty to each other.
Yeah, people.
And that's the biggest problem with collaboration is if you open up a shared library where everybody can get in and mess with it, then they're going to start undercutting each other and they're going to start screwing each other up. So if we're all in control of our own libraries and then we choose what we want to share with our team, then we have those discussions and we do the whiteboard diagrams and we figure out who needs what.
That's kind of why I think if you look at Resolve's collaboration, they have that timeline compare where you can actually accept what you want to accept, and it will show you like your system editor did these changes to these clips, or deleted these clips or added these clips or modified them, and it'll show you in reference from his or her timeline to yours, and then you can choose I'm accepting this, I'm denying this change, because there is an issue of merging.
Merging events and merging projects is another collaboration problem that would need to be solved. And you would, MergeX is an interesting tool that does kind of let who's in the showdown between the changes, this person's keywords, this person's favorites, and whatever, who wins? And you have like that little thing that shows them. In my mind, what would be even cooler is say we have the same media, and you've gone through and keyworded things your way, and I've gone through and rated and keyworded things my way, and now we're going to merge these two events into my library. Well, what if there was an identifier tag? So now it says this is Tony's favorites, and this is Tony's keywords, and these are Brad's keywords, and these are Brad's favorites. So then you don't have to and I can choose to hide some of yours or show some of yours, but now it's driven by some sort of ID tag of the user.
That could be cool and very confusing, I think, too.
This is the double-edged sword, which is, I think, why Apple has spent so much time trying to figure out what are the things that people can agree on with collaboration.
I collaborate in an office. Granted, it's a small office, and we're all within earshot of each other, but we collaborate all the time on libraries. Now, it's so-and-so, editor A has to have the library open. Nobody else has access to it.
Sure.
But we can export XMLs, or we can, that type of stuff. But I mean, we do it every day. I'm like, he's working on a spot for this campaign. I'm working on a spot for this other campaign. And then, hey, close that library. So I can open it and have access to it, and I'll do my tweaking. And then, in an hour, you can have access back to it. So
yeah. See, I'm right there right now. I'm having to completely recut an entire long, relatively large project because they took the scratch track VO and replaced it with the final VO, and all the timings are subtly off. So every single piece of it, I have to go in and retime visually to match the new pace of the voiceover. And, you'd think the same number of words could be read at the same pace, but that's not how people work.
No.
So all the time I spent carefully cutting the pitch video is thrown out. It's all gone. And as soon as the new VO comes in, I have to go back in. And I don't have to make the edits, but I have to retime every single edit through the entire piece.
I do that all the time.
Yeah. And so, I'm wondering, this is the scope and the problem that I'm thinking about whenever somebody talks about collaboration. At what point does easing collaboration make projects more and more difficult to get right? Because isn't that what we're talking about? We're talking about more people touching and having the ability to touch one work.
Apple should hire us. We got all the solutions for them.
Well, we're talking about it, but these are the things, when you think, I'd love to be able to have people collaborate with me, but then these, and what you
That's why I don't want a library that
Steve is looking at the social aspect of collaboration with that comment, which none of the rest of us looked at that. We were all thinking about how would it plumb in? Would it plumb in like Avid? We understand Avid. We understand bin locking. Why can't they just do that? And they're rethinking the whole, whoa.
Yep. Look what I have.
What's that? Rode?
Richard has his new microphones.
These things are so tiny, it's incredible.
Are those Bluetooth connecting?
I don't know. I don't think so. No,
I think they're 2.3 gigahertz regular wireless.
Right, and they have some kind of intelligent switching. So they have a tiny little microphone on this one, and it sounds really good. You can plug in a lapel mic if you want to, but I also was able to plug in a handheld mic to this. Certain handheld mics will work for this as well. But look, these things are so tiny that I haven't taken them out into the wild yet. I'm going to be doing that on Monday.
So what's the power situation?
Rechargeable battery, 7 to 8 hours each recharge.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and a USB.
That is one area where lav mics have just been so bulky.
USB-C.
Is it only one transmitter, one receiver?
Yeah, they're paired together as soon as you turn them on.
I'd love to have 2 transmitters, 1 receiver.
But you can, to $200. You can buy multiple ones.
Those are the more modern version of these guys, which are my AVX receivers.
Bluetooth. That's a Bluetooth.
No, this is not Bluetooth. This is 2.3 gigahertz wireless. Sennheiser made these, the AVX system, and that's an XLR plug. So this literally goes into a camera and is the receiver for a standard body pack.
Have you had any latency problems with that?
Zero. It's absolutely zero, and it does the same thing Richard's system does. These are more expensive than Richard's system. The cost has come down. But these channel hop agilely, so if there's any hit to a digital frequency, it switches in a micro millisecond so that there's no dropouts.
And these Rodes can also be used with an iPhone with an adapter.
Yeah.
So you can also do if you stream with iPhone. So that's, I figured I'd try them. They talked about them. I saw the initial impressions, and I saw some YouTube videos, and I said for $200. I mean, my Sony system is like $800 or $900. So I figured I'd try them, and so far I'm very impressed. Actually, the quality of the mic is not bad as well either. I had a couple of different lapels that I tried with it, but this mic sounds pretty good. It's a little bit more distinct than the lapel microphone so far. The idea is I can just clip this on somebody like this.
That's like true plug and go.
Yeah, exactly. No cable, and I can put just the actual clip outside, and ready to go. And the other thing is this clip fits in a cold shoe or a hot shoe. It's exactly the same size, so you can put it right on top of your camera, slip it in.
Oh, okay.
Very well designed. And they, like I said, 7 to 8 hours per charge, USB-C. They pair up instantly. So far, I haven't had any issues, but I'm going to take them out on Monday to do it.
So did you say the cost?
$200, $199.
For both of them?
Yes.
A transmitter receiver pairs.
That's pretty crazy.
200.
Yes.
Yeah, because these are about $1,000.
Right, exactly. My Sony was like $800, my Sony system that I've had for years.
The Sennheiser ones that are like $600 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So this, if
they have tiers. You can get a Sennheiser wireless pack that's $2,500.
It's like the G2, G3, the entry ones. But those that's like the bare minimum you had to get in order to not have crappy audio.
Sure. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think we've solved all the problems up to this point. This is going to be May 2019. We have officially solved every Final Cut Pro related problem up to this point.
Or just introduced a whole bunch more.
Well, that's the problem. That's exactly right. We've introduced a whole bunch more, and but the next time we will take care of the new ones, the new problems that we have. Next time we come on here.
Well, let's just take care of the ones we brought up this time.
So I'm still saying that we could see 10.5 before the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit, which Future Media Concepts has already announced that there is.
What's the dates?
No dates yet.
Oh, okay. They've announced they're doing it, but they haven't announced.
They've announced that there's going to be one. They've already. It's on the FCPX creativesummit.com. You can, but they that's up to Apple. They have to whatever Apple says.
Yeah.
Well, no, it seems like whatever dates they announce, somebody grumbles. When when it was Halloween. Oh, why is it over Halloween weekend?
The first 3 years,
and then
Halloween.
It was like, and then they moved it back a little bit, and people are like, oh, those are such bad dates for me. I'm working right before Thanksgiving, and The fact that it's over a weekend, I feel like makes it easier for me to just go. And although I've got to figure out another way to get there with a free ticket this year. So
maybe for you it's easier. I got locked out of last year because I was under the gun with end of year work. Right,
but it's just like, at least it's not like NAB. Monday through Wednesday or whatever, Thursday is a little bit more of a commitment in that sense than
Man, remember they're changing.
Even if I just
Sunday,
Sunday through Wednesday.
Sunday
through Wednesday.
Right.
I saw they changed the dates a little bit later in April.
Yeah, and also it's going to start at 12 noon on Sunday, not 10 a.m. like it does Monday now.
Oh, that's going to be weird.
It is going to be very weird. 12 to 6 on Sunday. It's like, it's a practice.
It's going to be interesting to look at the crowd on Sunday. I think they did that because they want a more general audience. They want people on a weekend who can't come Monday through Friday because they work. They work. They may be hobbyists and this kind of stuff.
This year was
prosumers.
This year was interesting because I saw. There's been a decline. 2 years ago, there was 10,000 more people at NAB, or more than 10. It's declined. The numbers have declined in the last couple of years. But
at the 10.
Well, yeah, but
steady, small shrinkage of all trades.
But what's interesting is I saw some YouTubers who weren't necessarily in the broadcasty film motion picture world, just more generic YouTubers that were showing up more. Like as they've grown up and they've needed to buy more expensive gear.
It's a new crop of folks coming in.
Yeah, there's so it's a declining crowd, but at the same time, I saw newer people showing up this year. So I don't know what that means for the future of it, but NAB definitely needs to cater involved to that crowd a little bit more as time goes on. The content creator.
Hey, the big camera manufacturer booths used to be all full of the little set pieces, right? You'd have 3 or 4 male and female models in there and a little country kitchen kind of thing or whatever. And this year they had a skateboard team doing action.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, I definitely saw like Sigma had a one of those traditional booths and others that was, just models repeating stuff. But yeah, the skateboard thing, what was that outside of Atomos, or was that one?
I've got a picture on my phone of it, but I can't remember that. See, there you go. I can't remember the booth. It might have been Atomos.
So speaking of Atomos, so there wasn't any ProRes RAW camera announcements this time. There was only
prior to it,
but that was all.
There was the Nikon and the others.
The Nikon camera.
There's a Nikon Z6 and 7 that will support ProRes RAW in an update.
Put the RAW and it'll be recorded on the Atomos.
Oh, yeah, but the Atomos. I'm talking about in-camera, sorry. In-camera.
Oh, in-camera ProRes RAW, no announcements.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's been no expansion.
But more cameras outputting RAW from the camera.
To the Atom, okay.
To the Atomos.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's VH.
And then, of course, we had the pre-announcement of, which Richard, we already talked about, of software. It's evolving rollout. I think people need to figure out how it's going to be used, and I think also some camera manufacturers need to decide whether or not they want to pay Red a license for recording compressed RAW.
So the Jeremy from Atomos, I watched his YouTube video, which people were really upset about. A lot of people didn't like it. He said all those pre-announcements about ProRes RAW were Apple's side of things. All the Grass Valley, but the cameras themselves, if they can output RAW, that's not ProRes RAW specific. But is that via HDMI, Brad? Those cameras?
The Z6 and Z7 is via HDMI, so you can get a Ninja V and hook it up to a Nikon Z6 or Z7, and you can record ProRes RAW on an Atomos recorder. But
I want the camera to record like the DJI camera does.
It'll get there. I mean, it's new tech, and bear in mind, ProRes took 3 or 4 years before it got everywhere.
Right.
It took time. I remember asking, why do I need ProRes? I've got DVC Pro HD. I've got XD Cam. I don't need ProRes. And I like Bill's hand.
Yeah, that was Bill.
I just realized too much headspace. It was bothering me. I haven't been watching my own picture. It was very small in the upper corner.
And then all of a sudden, everybody was asking for ProRes master files. Yeah. The Arri Alexa was recording ProRes. Blackmagic supported ProRes. Like it it took a few years, and we're only in the second year.
Arri was the nail in the coffin. I think that was the one that said it. Like once they put ProRes in, it was.
Yeah, it was just the dominoes fell.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so do you think Apple's courting them or asking them to do it?
I'm sure they are. Absolutely. Why wouldn't they? I think the hiccup has just been Red, saying, "Hey, wait, we have a patent on compressed RAW."
Sure.
Yeah.
And that patent expires in 6 years, I think,
Okay.
or 4 or 5 years, something like that. I think that patents are valid for about 15 years on that kind of tech.
And
but
can Apple buy Red?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know why they would.
I think they would. Well, just to get the patent.
No, my understanding is at least the deal Atomos made with it was pretty. Sounds like it was pretty amicable, and it was it was a fair deal. So
okay,
if Red's not holding people hostage over that patent, then I think it'll be fine.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've now not only solved Final Cut Pro problems, we got into RAW and Red RAW, and we've solved all those problems as well. What do you think?
So many more problems.
All right.
If making content was easy, everyone would do it.
That's true.
Wait.
I'll end on this. We went down to St. George a week before NAB actually as a family, and my 3-year-old daughter pulled out her tablet and turned on the camera and said, "Hey guys, we're here in St. George."
Is that right?
She's vlogging.
She's watching Dad.
That's natural.
I was like, oh boy. But then I asked her, I said, "So do you want to be on YouTube?" And she says, "No, it's too dangerous." And I'm like, "Do you want to pretend to do YouTube?" She's like, "Sure."
Yeah.
Ask her
As
again.
long as you're not thinking about monetizing her feed already.
Did you see the one clip I had of when I got backstage at Faster Together and Sam was getting his makeup?
I didn't see that. I don't know if I saw the clip.
a
Yeah, I
picture.
did.
I saw that.
Yeah, Mike Horton took me
Taylor.
back there, and I got him getting his makeup.
I saw a photo of that too on there. So yeah.
Yeah, and then Mike Horton says, "Hey, how come Sam's gets makeup?"
That was one crazy backstage, I got to tell you.
Yes, it was. Absolutely.
You have no idea how close that came. Not to not working, because there were very competent people back there, but just the sheer amount of, how do I phrase this correctly? Thank God for the people who Jeffrey and Sam and those guys depended on, because without the core crew, the hotel staff had some issues. Some of them were great. Some of them were fabulous folks and did a great job. Others,
right, which is typical, right?
Not so fabulous.
So was it more complex than a super meet?
Orders of magnitude.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, no, I won't say that. If you just walked backstage and looked at nothing but Video Village, you would probably think that they were equivalent. You might even think that the super meet backstages of the past were a bit more sophisticated, because there were fewer people but more consolidation, and the guys who ran it, they had done this a lot, over and over again. They were like 6, 8, 10 years into doing the super meets.
Sure.
They are where this team will be if they keep doing this in 3 or 4 years. But this team also is working really hard to bring the backstage tech into the modern era. So they're working really hard at doing a lot of video over IP stuff, as opposed to let's just string XLRs and DNCs and hook it up like normal, because we all understand this. They're really pushing the edges. And in post, those video over IP options give you much bigger flexibility, and you can turn things much faster. You've already noticed that there's a couple of things out already from those recorded things.
Yeah.
And so I think it's less, we really need a lot of time to post these things, and more, let's release them on a sensible schedule so that we don't just toss everything out.
And hey, how about those videos Chris Fenwick cut together?
Yep.
It was fascinating watching them to come together.
And you and Alan did all the filming get those.
We filmed them, and then it was funny to talk to people during the break because they were like, "Wait, I didn't realize that I would be up on screen tonight."
Right.
Like we tried to tell them, but it didn't comprehend that we were going to cut it, and we were going to show these 60 to 90-second pieces that night, which really spoke to the whole Faster Together thing and the community thing. It was not my idea, but I was happy to help with it, and I'm glad that we pulled it off, and that Fenwick was so funny backstage because he a half hour into the show he had 5 videos cut. We canned one of them that we were gonna do, so we had 6 ideas and we did 5 of the 6. And once he kind of figured them all out, he radios Jeff and he says, "All right, I'm going out back for a smoke break. I'm done."
It's all on you now.
And I got to give a shout out to Amy, the lead audio woman. My God, she walked into an absolute disaster and pulled that together in an unbelievable fashion. And she mixed the show without being able to hear it.
Wow.
I don't know if you guys know. Well, Richard, you're in audio, so you'll appreciate this. On stage, because of the nature of the fact that on stage, when you think about it, it was a breakout rectangle near a big rectangle,
right,
hundreds of feet away. There was about a 1.5 second delay. The first time I did a voiceover, I couldn't believe it. It was worse than when I did a stadium gig for a sports team for a year. It was awful. The delay between talking into a mic and having it bounce back twice, interrupting your ability to say the second word. And she managed to mix that completely competently under those horrible circumstances. So, Amy, if you're out there and you watch this, you're a gem.
Well, you sounded great, though, as
she's
usual.
Watching, but yeah, she did, and because they had to let another sound guy go before, and she was brought in pretty late. And
she was supposed to walk into a built rig and just mix it, and she ended up having to literally, with 2 of us, build the entire audio show in 3 hours. And that was not a simple audio show.
There you go. Well, gentlemen, I think we've now solved audio problems as well. Add that to our list.
There you go.
So thank you all for joining us. If you celebrate Easter, happy Easter. If you celebrate Passover, happy Passover this weekend. I'm not sure what other holidays are this weekend, but those are the 2 that I know of.
Yeah.
And I will see you guys again. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye.
Bye.